and how they're involved, but we'll be broadening this conversation because at this moment, Jubilee Party is launching its manifesto, their plan, their blueprint for the next 5 years, should you, the voter, give them the mandate on the 8th of August, which is just 42 days away. My panel tonight, the pundits on Kivumbi2017, we've got Javas Bigambo, we have Daisy Amdani, and we have Martin Olo. And we have ensured that we have met the two-thirds gender rule. And we have met that principle.
50-50.
Yes, and we will be discussing whether Jubilee has managed to do that over the last 4.5 years. Please do join in the conversation, whether you think Jubilee has lived up to its promises that it made in 2013. So let's get right into it, guys. Daisy, I want to start with you. You know, just a scorecard of Jubilee from 2013 to date, before we even get into the expectations and perhaps some of the things that we're hearing from Kasarani.
You know, sometimes I am a bit afraid to, you know, score them because there's the fear of being accused of being extremely negative. But let's start with their commitment to the women. In 2013, their manifesto was expressed, very clear. They're going to implement the two-thirds gender principle. We have not seen this happening. They didn't use their numbers in Parliament to actually push through the legislation. The president slackened when it came to shuffling his cabinet. So on that score, I think that Jubilee failed, and I don't know what more they can tell us, because if you have failed to honor one commitment and you make a new promise, if you didn't fulfill the former, will you fulfill the latter one? That's a question that needs to be answered. On the economic empowerment, a great program, AgPro, the access to government tendering. I think that the potential for it to be transformative was there, but it was messed up as usual. And, you know, the ghost of corruption was there, profiteering, cronies benefiting from this program, no accountability on it. The issue of corruption, remember that Jubilee were very key. They spoke about corruption. They said that they would deal with corruption, and that has now become one of the clarion calls around Jubilee, is that Jubilee really have to deal with the issue of corruption. We haven't seen much movement there. You know, okay, fine, the people have stepped aside.
The multi-sectoral agency that they have put together by people from the various sectors, and I think that may be outlined tonight as they launch their manifesto.
Well, you know, those are some of the things that we need to hear. We need to hear Jubilee's commitment. I think the first thing that I would want to hear from them, from the manifesto that is coming on the issue of corruption, is the commitment by the president to ensure that all politicians, starting with himself, will make a public declaration of their wealth, their assets, and those close family members. So, and to make it an annual requirement for all civil servants and politicians, so that we know who owns what, how much people have, and people to be able to justify the kind of wealth that we see with our politicians. Food security. Jubilee actually talked strongly on the issue of food security in 2013. In fact, one of the key promises, one of their key commitments, was that Kenya would no longer be a rain-fed agricultural country, but they were going to invest heavily in irrigation and ensure that nobody dies from hunger. And yet we see that as this term is coming to a close,
food security
is a major issue. And the issues that they're pointing out is not the irrigation, but they're talking about failure of rains and climate change.
So
those are some of the
issues. And we'll come back because there's lots to talk about. I mean, there's Galana Kulalu, and to talk about, you know, just what happened with that was irrigation. So Daisy has talked about women, but also a number of other issues. Javas, I know you are a political analyst, but also the chair of the youth agenda in the country. So could you speak to us about youth? Because Daisy talked about, you know, all of these opportunities for young people. 30% of tenders by government would be to young people, women, and persons with disability. Uwezo Fund was a promise that they kept. Remember the money that was set aside for a possible runoff, and they said they would put that into Uwezo. I mean, there's been a lot, including NYS. What's your perspective in terms of what they've done for young people. We'll get into the politics.
This manifesto is being launched at night. And I wonder whether it is a signifying, story of a new dawn, or maybe being stuck in darkness. That is something that we shall wade into perhaps sometime. However, I think to look at what Jubilee is doing tonight with regard to matters youth, matters persons with disability, matters women, for instance, it is proper for me to come to a conclusion that it has been very dissatisfying. Yes, we have got all these frameworks, the Weather Fund, etc., the Youth Enterprise Development Fund, the Women's Fund, etc. All these hinged to the Vision 2030, all right, and the social pillar of the Vision 2030. But we continue to see how visionless a government is, even though we have a national policy that informs matters Vision 2030. Look at it this way. To this day, in this country, you realize that many youth, many young people, for instance, are in the informal sector, Juakali, etc. One would want to ask a critical question. To this day, this night, how much money has the Jubilee administration pumped to scale up or improve operations or even prospects in the Juakali industry? The other thing is this. If at all even you look at the issue of the access to government opportunity or procurement opportunities, far too many young people have had their companies procure for services with government. Far too many, including tonight, are very bitter people because government entities have not paid them up yet. Yet they, procured, they were successful, they offered services, etc. So in the end, I think it's not a question of promises being made. We need this government, or any other government for that matter, to realize that matching promises to fulfillment of those promises and tying a beginning to an end is what should count the most.
All right, that's an interesting statement, tying the beginning to the end. But surely it hasn't been all that bad. Has it, Martin?
Surely it hasn't been. And I hear my colleagues, and that's right. But then there's also another side of it. Let me give them some browning points. Let's start with the ICT. And the media knows this far too well. The fight on digitization and so on. And they managed actually to do the migration. And today, I think Kenyans are reaping the advantages of digitization. Let's look at even the promise of the laptops. I mean, the fact that they came late was just that it's one thing to promise and it's one thing to govern. As they said, and by the way, everybody has said, for example, on the issue of education, that come September, you'll deliver this. Now, the promises are easier to make. The issue is implementation and the mechanisms around it, because laptops were mired in procurement challenges, and so you can't necessarily pin it on the government. So if you look at the systems. So I've looked at ICT. Let's give them land. Land reforms, I think that they started very well on land reforms. It may have slackened over the last 1 year or so, but there were good attempts at giving people title deeds, resolving some of the, perennial problems.
But Martin, then do a land report, there's the TJRC.
Yes, but I'm talking about reforms in land sector where people are actually getting some title.
Constant fights between the National Land Commission and the Ministry of Lands.
Those are the negatives, but let's look at the positives.
Okay.
There are some people who have gotten titles.
All right.
There are some places like Kivumbi where there was land dispute forever. Directors are being killed.
Yeah.
There's an attempt to get them. I mean, at least they were given titles.
Okay.
Moi Committee is now actually going to a subdivision, and things like Waitiki and so on. So there are actually certain things have been resolved. Remember, I'm looking at the positive sides, and then let's look at education, for example. You can look at it and say, hey, the reforms in the primary school exams, the number of students who have sat and passed the exams and actually gotten admitted to the universities, the issue of cut-off points having gone. In fact, now the crisis is perhaps there are not enough students to go to universities because the tightening of exams the management of exams has made it impossible for people simply to buy their scores and so on. So if you look at it from just those two things, the education, look at ICT, look at land sector, grant them also on infrastructure. You may have issues, but they have done the big thing, SGR. They have done the big, some of the roads, and they've done some of the major dams. They've done some of the, irrigation. Again, that's another story we can come to. The attempts are there. The vision is there. The challenges are there also.
Okay, and that's important to mention. But let's also talk about that manifesto in 2013. It was very specific on a number of issues. And I remember when we were discussing this issue of manifestos in the country and whether they will inform the vote, you know, a couple of our panelists here said that perhaps they promised too much and they were extremely specific, if you like, and that may not be something they might want to do. I mean, when they talked about rolling out the digital learning program, that was in the first 100 days. They talked about 1 million jobs every year. They were extremely specific. The 5 stadia that everybody keeps saying, where are they? Do you think they're likely to be as specific as they were? Might they have learned their lesson? I see Javas wants to come in, so I'll let you do so. Or do you think they'll be a little more measured with this one as they launch it?
Well, I'm gripped by the benefit of retrospect when I look at the Jubilee Manifesto's launch tonight. Look, as you even indicate the issues that they promised and whether Jubilee needs to be forgiven for having perhaps been too optimistic on their part, the part of these politicians, my answer would be not really. Because if it's a question of politicians just being merely optimistic, then the Jubilee Party should have had the grace, and should have the grace anyway, to speak to a nation that it has led for the past 4 years and explain why is it that much has not been achieved. What are these that fettered the
So
Jubilee
you
government?
expect them to at least talk about the challenges and why they were not able to meet all of their promises?
In fact, it would be the most conscientious and objective and proper thing to do.
Okay.
Because how do you launch a new manifesto when you've not spoken to the fulfillment or lack of the same in the former that is coming to an end actually today? And the other thing is this. I think we need to have, or to bring ourselves to a point where politicians don't just take to the agora to promise things that they think will be political gyrations that excite ordinary Kenyans. We don't need just that. Political parties should realize this, that with the frame of the new Constitution of Kenya 2010, political parties are critical institutions that should inform policy and also how that policy is fulfilled in terms of building a nation.
Right.
So actually manifestos are not just a PR exercise kind of document. It is a document that informs policy of a government and what it will do.
I want to agree with Javas, but I also want to say something, that there is the difference between an ideal and the reality. Manifestos speak to circumstances and context. What you're talking about could as well be very interesting, but who is the target and who is the voter here? To what extent is the voter excited about manifesto, or what is it that really excites voters in this country of
Is
Kenya?
it about the voter or is it about the political party?
No,
because
first
I
of
think
all,
it's important.
manifestos are intended to relate to the voter. Because basically what the government is saying is, look, you gave us 4 years and a half, we now want 5 years, and here is what we're going to do. So they are talking to the voter. So this manifesto must speak to a voter.
Right. Is it too technical, though?
It's not
When you
technical.
start to get into details, or is it fairly
shouldn't.
simple?
No, they really do need to get into the details.
Yeah.
They need to be detailed and on the how they're going to deliver
Do
this
you think
stuff.
they're going to be as detailed now?
I don't
Because
think
in
so.
2013, they
think-
were very explicit in a number of things they were going to do. I think even to the how.
I don't think they are going to be. I mean, because like Jarvis has said, they have yet to explain why they didn't achieve those aspirations that they had in 2013 and what were the challenges. And I think that because of that and being held to account for that, we're going to see more sweeping statements, statements that are more generalized, fair, equitable distribution of resources and access to just those general the general statements, and we've seen them on the campaign trail. That's what they've been doing. They've just been making very generalized and very sweeping statements. But for me, I think that the bigger problem is that you see Jubilee, they are the incumbent government, okay? So whatever it is that they're launching tonight, it must be practicable. They can't get away with just making those sweeping statements because they are the administration that is at work. They need to show us how they are going to link those promises or those aspirations, how they're going to achieve that. Because I've been hearing them talking about free secondary education for everyone.
Yeah.
Remember that one of the biggest issues that have been bedeviling this current administration is the wage bill. Government's wage bill and the cash crunch that government is facing.
Right.
We've seen the running battles with the teachers over remuneration. So how are they going to achieve this? At what cost? So because there's a cost to all of this. And when government is making that commitment, remember, that government is committing us.
Yeah.
When government says we are going to, it is we who are going to.
Right.
You know, so we need to.
So,
they need to tell us how they are going to achieve this.
It's interesting you're saying that, because we're running some of those pledges that they have made, just like you said, in the various rallies that are there. And once we take that on your full screen, you'll be able to see that expanding free maternity healthcare. They're talking about providing power to all by the year 2020, I believe, expanding food production, completing 57 large-scale dams. Is this what you were talking about with the sweeping ones?
Well, they're quite specific, you know, the numbers and all.
Expanding free maternal health care is something that they've already had and started.
They have started, and it's a shared function. So they should tell us how they're going to work with the county governments to be able to achieve this. And also, don't forget that government has commitments under the Maputo Protocol in terms of budgetary allocation to health care. Yeah. And they have not met. They have not met those commitments as a country that has already ratified this protocol. Okay. So I mean, when you look at it, it's easier said than done, you know.
All right. So at what point, and I know you're talking about that perhaps they should start to speak to some of the challenges and why they were unable to meet some of the promises. We will perhaps go in and try and listen into what they're saying, because we understand cabinet secretaries, you know, are making presentations on, you know, what they've been able to achieve in the various ministries over the last 4.5 years or so, and, you know, what they want able to do. But even as we take a look at that, I want us to focus a little bit to tomorrow, because this is the season of manifestos. Javas, let me start with you. How different will this be from NASA, or how different will NASA be tomorrow from tonight, considering they're already squabbling over who pinched free secondary education idea from the other? We started it first. No, we said it. No, we said it in 2003 during the Kibaki administration. No, you know, this is something we've done. How ideologically different are they? Because everybody says this is, one, an implementation of the Constitution and its requirements, or two, an implementation of Vision 2030. But is there something distinctly different that would make a voter say, after listening to Jubilee today and NASA tomorrow, I am convinced that these two are significantly different, and I will vote for Jubilee over NASA or NASA over Jubilee?
Well, I think beyond the difference of optical illusion and how one has packaged their document.
Today you have English for us, Javas.
No, I mean really.
Optical illusions, okay, sorry.
Really, because I wouldn't expect much more difference. However, from where I sit, each time a political party launches a manifesto, it is a time where a nation's hope is tested. And in fact, not just that, where it's a time when the conscience of a nation should be called. And it's the common citizens who should be looking to political parties as they launch these manifestos to speak to their aspirations, tie that to the future that they want to walk into, which should be reasonable, practical, and commonsensical. But now the thing is this. Look at, for example, on the political field, how they're push and pulling, as you've said, that we're the ones who came up with this idea, free primary education, free secondary education, whatever kind of thing. They forget whatever kind of ideas they're peddling or they have, it is for the good of this country. However, Kenyans are not asking the hard questions. When you say that we're going to have free secondary education, whether it's Jubilee, whether it's NASA, you need also to explain to Kenyans how they are going to pay for this. Because it's not free at the end. How is that going to, to have an implication on the taxation and the tax regime? That's the questions that Kenyans should be asking. And much more than that, look at the free primary education and the journey it has been up to now, and how it has affected quality education. Now, to what extent are we willing again to buy poor education on the cheap by just merely embracing free secondary education? Right. So if at all any party is promising free secondary education, or anything free which is not free after all, they need to speak to us in terms of informing quality, embracing and sustaining that quality, because when you look at our constitution, one of the values of this country is sustainable development. Our development should be sustainable.
I wanted to answer this in a fairly straight way. There isn't going to be any major difference from tomorrow's NASA manifesto from Jubilee's. And I give you three things. Number one, manifestos as we know them in this country, do not speak to the common voter. They speak to business. They speak to international development partners. They simply is a public relations, an international relations affair. So that's it. So coming back to where we are, there isn't much difference that we are going to see tomorrow from NASA and Jubilee. And here are 3 pointers. Number one, they seem to be all agreed about public sector-driven investments. So when you talk about 57 dams, when you talk about education, when you talk about infrastructure, when you talk about energy, you simply are looking at public sector-driven investments. So both sides are going to talk about that tomorrow, and we've seen it. When you talk about free education, I agree with Javas. It's not free because somebody's funding it. It's the public. So it's going to mean a certain tax component that is going to have to fund education, so to speak. So they are speaking about it. They seem to be agreed. Now, when you look at other things they're talking about below, health and so on, the one thing that is likely to be different is the treatment of devolution. I think one is going to be more pronounced on devolution than the other.
All right, hold that thought, because yes, devolution is something that will be different. Jubilee says they have met and surpassed the constitutional requirement, giving even more than what was required. Of course, NASA has been hinting at 45%. But let's remind you that our conversation continues as well on the ground in Makongeni area, and Lofty Matambo is there. You know, Kivumbi2017 is nothing without our poll on the ground. And today we're asking about the youth and their involvement in this matter. Lofty, naona kura zinahesabiwa?
Naam, Ivoni, asante sana. Hapa kimeumana, sijui kama unasikia kelele huko nyuma, ni kura zinahesabiwa. Wapiga kura mpo? Tupo! Kura tumehesabu, hatuhesabu. Wapiga kura mpo? Naam, hizo. Asanteni. Asanteni, asanteni, asanteni. Asanteni. Naam, tutarudi kwako baadaye. Tutarudi kwako baadaye kuweza kuhesabu kura. Yvonne, hivyo ndo hali ilivyo. Naam, bila shaka ni wanaimba NASA, lakini hapa kura zinazopigwa si za NASA wala Jubilee. Na labda tu nikupatie matokeo kwa sasa, Yvonne, ni kwamba kura zinaendelea kuhesabiwa, na vijana hapa wanasema kwamba katika vile vigezo ambavyo tumewapatia, je, wanatumikaje kisiasa? Kura 53 zimekwenda kwa kuzua ghasia. Wanasema wanatumiwa kuzua ghasia. Kura 49 wanatumiwa kubuni sera. Kura 28 ni kwa kutafuta vyeo. Kura ambazo zimefika 150 ni za kuleta mabadiliko. Bado zinaendelea kuhesabiwa. Tutakuwa tunarudi kutoa matokeo rasmi. Haya ni ya kushikilia tu hapa katika uwanja wa Makongeni. Yvonne, kwako.
Asante sana, Lofty Matambo. I hope you will be safe and make sure that the vote is guarded and the integrity of that ballot is kept at its utmost. Let's make sure that we don't hear cases of sudden issues. Perhaps you should have a complementary mechanism for transmitting the results to us here at the KTN News Center. We'll catch up with Lofty again in just a moment as the votes continue being counted in Makongeni. You're watching Kivumbi 2017. We're discussing the Jubilee Manifesto launch that is currently ongoing at Kasarani. The President, his deputy, and cabinet secretaries all in attendance, including Jubilee Party members. And we're here trying to analyze the Jubilee scorecard of 2013. What was met, what promises were met, what weren't, and what do they need to look forward to if they get the mandate 42 days from today. Taking a break, we'll be right back.